Good morning. It's Monday, July 1st. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 269 days old. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Three quick housekeeping notes this morning. First, special thanks to my colleague David Daoud, who hosted the show on Friday. His conversation with Lina Khatib on Lebanon was a good one, worth the listen if you didn't catch it. Second, happy Canada Day to all of our friends in the North. And third, welcome back, as always, to the FDD Morning Brief. It was a scary few hours in Antalya, Turkey yesterday when an El Al flight was forced to land because of an ill passenger on board. The first reports out of Israel suggested that the Turkish authorities were holding the plane on the ground. It looked like a possible diplomatic crisis was developing. As it turns out, airport workers were simply unwilling to refuel the Israeli plane. The matter was ultimately resolved, but it was a reminder to all of us, as we talk about here all the time, how unpredictable and dangerous the Erdogan government can be. This has, of course, been a consistent theme here at the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest this morning is Daniel Pipes. Daniel actually gave me my big break in the think tank world shortly after I returned to the U.S. after graduate school at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. His think tank, the Middle East Forum, is based in the great city of Philadelphia. I learned a ton working for Daniel, and I'm thrilled that he's agreed to join us today live in just a few minutes here on the FDD Morning Brief. A Hezbollah drone struck the Golan Heights yesterday, injuring 18 Israeli soldiers. The attack came amidst ongoing tensions on the Lebanese-Israeli border, as we all know. There's a major international campaign underway right now to de-escalate, but Hezbollah is just not interested. The group is feeling pretty damn good about itself lately. In fact, Hezbollah scored a major victory on another front yesterday. The Arab League declared it will no longer classify Hezbollah as a terrorist group. Assistant Secretary General Hossam Zaki said the bloc doesn't maintain terrorist lists. Right. Let's be real. The move reflects the Arab world's fear of Iranian power. The Arabs are watching the regime and all of its terror proxies get away with murder, literally. The regime has paid no price for waging war against Israel, not to mention the attacks on U.S. and international maritime traffic. The White House has been feckless and weak. The Arabs see it and they want nothing to do with it. So they're now hedging. If it wasn't clear before, it should be crystal clear now. The Biden White House is losing the Middle East. To staunch the bleeding, they need to arm the Israelis, who are the only ones fighting. But they also need to take real steps to counter Tehran too, and soon. Because if this keeps up, we're going to watch the region fall prey to Iranian influence. And that's no good for anyone. Not the Arabs, not Israel, not the United States. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, Israeli and German media jointly revealed the contents of secret Hamas documents outlining step-by-step plans for the October 7th attacks. The details are chilling. Hamas originally intended to conquer 221 Israeli communities through a three-wave assault. First, Hamas's elite Nukhba terrorists would storm the border, then assorted garden variety terrorists would follow, and then finally the group would unleash a mob of everyday Gazans to storm Israel. It was all planned. Leadership even gave explicit instructions to broadcast the assault for public viewing for maximum psychological effect. And get this, Hamas knew that Israel would respond forcefully. The terror group was even prepared to absorb a nuclear attack if it meant that they could conquer, kidnap, pillage, and kill. Headline 2, the IDF carried out a drone strike against terror operatives in the West Bank city of Tulkarm. The strike killed 1 and it injured 5. Islamic Jihad ID'd the dead as Saeed Jabir, who the group said was, quote, one of the founders and most prominent leaders, end quote, of the local Pidge branch. Meanwhile, IDF Special Forces conducted separate raids elsewhere in the northern West Bank where they detained several wanted operatives. Since October 7th, the IDF has carried out more than 50 airstrikes. It has eliminated 80 terror operatives and has arrested more than 4,000 others in the West Bank, including some 1,750 Hamas affiliates. As we've been saying for a while now, this war is not just about Gaza. In addition to that little strip of land along the Mediterranean, Iran-backed proxies are also fighting in Lebanon and the West Bank, to say nothing of Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. And headline 3, Iranian presidential elections are heading for a runoff. Oh, the drama. Iranians went to the ballot box on Friday. Actually, only about 40% of the eligible voters did. It was a record low turnout. Iran's ex-nuclear negotiators, Saeed Jalili and Masoud Pezeshkian, gosh, that's always hard to say, the so-called reformist candidate, came out on top, but neither secured the absolute majority required to clinch the presidency. So a runoff is set for July 5th. It will be the second ever presidential runoff in the history of the Islamic Republic, but it's all one big sham. Both candidates are extremists. If they weren't, the regime wouldn't have allowed them to run in the first place. Many were, in fact, disqualified before the voting began. So no, the July 5th runoff will be neither free nor fair. Okay, I'm now pleased to introduce you to Daniel Pipes. He's the founder and president of the Middle East Forum. I'm proud to say that he and I co-authored a number of articles together back in the day. That was actually 20 years ago. Yikes. We also teamed up to chronicle the decay and corruption inside the field of Middle Eastern studies across academia in the United States. Today, Daniel has a new book out called Israel Victory: How Zionists Win Acceptance and Palestinians Get Liberated. I've invited him on the program today to talk about his book live here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Daniel Pipes.
Thank you, Jonathan Schanzer.
All right, well, welcome. Do us a favor. Show us the cover of the book so we can see it here. I know you have one right in front of you there.
If I must.
You must. Excellent. Yeah, keep it right in the middle there so it doesn't get blurred out. That's a good-looking cover. Okay, so we're going to talk about Israel Victory. The subtitle is provocative. What do you mean by how Zionists win acceptance and Palestinians get liberated? That's actually some choice language.
Well, the idea was to prompt, to intrigue potential readers to want to know more. What I mean by it is that the Israelis, the Zionists before Israelis, have always had a desire to be accepted, foremost by their most immediate neighbors, the Palestinians. And the Palestinians have been suffering from an ideology, what I call rejectionism, that goes back almost 150 years. And they are oppressed by it, and they need liberation. So one side needs acceptance, the other side needs liberation. I think it's possible. I try and sketch out how that could be made to happen.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute, but one of the things that, and I mean, I've seen your campaign. I've seen actually some of the billboards in Israel, this idea of Israel Victory. Want to just explain what that means? And you've talked about this now for something like 20 years, that Israel needs this above all else.
Well, as you know, I'm a historian, and I note that through history, wars, conflicts come to an end when one side gives up. It's simple. I mean, it's intuitive. You keep fighting until one side gives up. And if neither side gives up, it's potentially going to come back at any moment. Think of the Koreas. 70 years, no fighting, no serious fighting, and yet it could happen as we speak. Look at World War I and look at World War II. World War I was not a decisive victory. The Germans and others did not think they had lost, and so they tried again. World War II, the Allies had learned the lessons of World War I and made sure that the Germans and others understood that they'd lost and it was over. And indeed, it has been for some 80 years now. In that same spirit, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and mind you, I'm saying Palestinian-Israeli, not Arab-Israeli, not talking about the Arab states. Arab states are a very different topic. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict has gone on for close to a century and a half and is growing. And the only way it will end is if one side gives up. Now, that could be the Israelis. They could give up. They could flee Israel and become a Palestinian state. Or it could be the Israelis win and the Palestinians come to accept Israel, to work with Israel, live with Israel, not fight Israel. Obviously, the latter is the preferable solution. And that's what I'm encouraging Americans, others, and especially Israelis, also Palestinians, to see as the way forward.
Yep, this is actually a remarkably consistent message from you for as long as I've known you, and it's interesting to see how some ideas just actually gain traction over time. Let me ask you specifically, inside the book, you write, I'll quote, Palestinian perfidy and Israeli folly start the story. Foreign ineptness completes it. End quote. Please explain.
Yeah. Well, you might say, who am I to cast aspersions on all the parties? But yeah, the Palestinians have adopted this rejectionist mentality of no, 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 we want to kill you, get out of here, we want nothing to do with you. That is evil. The Israeli folly also goes back, way back. And basically, it's a policy of conciliation, of what I call enrichment and placation. Hey, Palestinians, let us be here, give us a chance, and you will be better off. You'll have better water supplies, you'll have better electricity, you'll have better incomes, and also placation. Nice doggy, nice doggy. Don't get too ferocious. So that's the Israeli folly. It's been a terrible policy, an eccentric policy, a counterproductive policy that makes no sense at all in 2024. Maybe it made sense in 1884, but it makes no sense today. And so that's the folly. The third part is the incompetence of the foreigners. The foreigners keep bigfooting in, especially the United States, with big ideas on how to solve the conflict that are inept. Now, fortunately, the Biden administration, for its many mistakes, and you made a very dramatic assertion in the opening remarks about how the White House is losing the Middle East, and I agree. So for all the Biden administration's mistakes in the Middle East, it has not come up with a peace plan. Hallelujah. It's the first administration that hasn't in decades. But these peace plans that go back right to the beginning under Eisenhower, they've been inept, wrong-headed, foolish, and counterproductive.
Tend to agree. And sure. Actually, I will say that that's an interesting point you make here, that this is the first administration we've seen in quite a while that hasn't tried to go big. I mean, even the Trump administration did, which, sure, I don't know whether that helped or hurt at the end of the day. But let me ask you another question. You write that the Palestinians and Iran pose opposite dangers to Israel. In one case, narrative, not violence. In the other case, violence, not narrative. And you also note that a Palestinian change of heart is as important to Israel as dispatching the Iranian nuclear threat. That's a pretty provocative way of describing the situation. You'd say that one feels almost tactical and the other one feels existential. I think that's the way that most analysts approach this. So unpack it for us.
Well, obviously the nuclear weapons are existential, but I would argue that the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian ability to win supporters of their cause, i.e. anti-Zionists, people who hate Israel, people who want Israel to be eliminated, that is existential as well. And look around. Look at the singers, look at the politicians, look at the union members, look at the dictators. I mean, it's all around. And that is not due to the Iranian threat. Nobody has emotions involved there. Nobody is anti-Israel because of Iran, or for that matter, any state. When the states were dominant in the 50s and 60s, they won, the Arab states, they won very little support. Now, who supported Egypt or Syria or Jordan? Nobody in the larger world. But the Palestinian narrative, in part because they truly are weak, in part because they've been very capable, has spread around the world, and I believe poses, like the Iranian nuclear weapons, an existential threat to Israel. And the Israelis have been inept in dealing with it. They have, or put it differently, they have tried to deal with it by dealing with what I call college students on TikTok. They're important, no doubt, and Israelis should pay attention to college students on TikTok. But the Palestinians are a whole lot more important. And it's my take that the security establishment in Israel has given up preemptively on the Palestinians. I use the analogy of hyenas and lions. Hyenas and lions have always fought, will always fight. And the security establishment in Israel sees itself as the lion that will always be attacked by the hyenas. And I'm saying no. They are not hyenas. They're human beings. They are, I mean, obviously, they don't think they're not human beings, but I'm trying to make a dramatic point that they evolve, they are evolving, and they're actually, I think, evolving in some ways in a good direction. So I am optimistic. I am saying, no, Israelis, don't think this is forever and give up in advance. Try and address it. Try and address the Palestinians, not just the outside world, but the focus of your problem, the Palestinians, the Gazans, West Bankers, and East Jerusalem Muslims.
You know, it's interesting because I think there are still a lot of folks in Washington, which admittedly Washington maybe is not the best representative sample, but there are a lot of folks in this town that kind of say, well, all of this Palestinian stuff, it's a distraction from the real threat. And it's interesting to hear you zero in on it. And that, I think, kind of gets me to a simple question, and one that I think will probably yield an interesting answer from you. Who gains and who loses from a Palestinian defeat and of course, from an Israeli victory? I mean, how does that play out?
Before I get to that, let me make a point about the Washington consensus. I believe that a great number of people in Washington are influenced by the Israeli outlook. So when the Israelis make a mistake, you hear it reverberate in Washington. When the Israelis believe that enrichment will lead to the Palestinians easing off in their enmity, you find that view, which is an eccentric view. I mean, normally, look at Russia. Normally, when you have a problem, you cut off, you break relations, you impoverish. But no, the Israelis come up with this idea a long time ago that you don't impoverish the Palestinians, you benefit the Palestinians, and that has become a Washington consensus. Likewise, there is a sense in Israel that the Palestinians, to quote the pithy statement of a friend and very capable analyst, but I think mistaken here, Ephraim Inbar, he calls the Palestinians a strategic nuisance. No, deal with them. No, if you're focused on the violence alone, the kind of violence Palestinians can incur, even including October 7th, is minor compared to what the states can do. But if you look at the narrative, if you look at the hostility towards Israel, unique hostility, no other state in the world has anything remotely like this, then the Palestinians are not a nuisance, but a strategic threat. To get back to your question, who gains? Everybody gains. Obviously, the Israelis gain by being accepted. This is the Israeli dream. This is what Israel has been striving for all of its existence. The Palestinians gain because they're liberated from this nihilism, this rejectionism that causes them oppression, poverty, suicide bombings, and all the other miseries that the Palestinians are unfortunately self-imposing. They need to have this shaken, broken. And finally, I would say, more speculatively, Muslim citizens of Israel, usually called Arabs, Israeli Arabs, but I prefer the term Muslims because they are overwhelmingly Muslim, who live in an ambivalent situation. They appreciate much about Israel, but they also don't like being citizens of a Jewish state. Everybody would benefit if they saw Gaza and the West Bank as good places to live. The Israeli Jews would be delighted. The Israeli Muslims would be delighted. The West Bankers and Gazans would be delighted because they'd get a skilled population, more skillful than its own. So that's speculative. It's pretty distant, but I can see also, in addition to West Bankers, Gazans, Jewish Israelis, I can see Muslim Israelis also benefiting from this.
Interesting. All right, we got time for one more question, and I was kind of debating which one to ask you, but let me ask you this one. You submitted your book, this new book of yours, a week before October 7th, and then you pulled it to make changes until the last day of 2023. That's a fairly dramatic thing to do. I think probably justifiable in light of kind of the history that was being made in real time. But I'm just curious, how extensive were those changes, and what did you change when you went back and you made those revisions?
Well, initially I was confused after October 7th because it sounded like Israel victory had become universal view in Israel. And so I thought, well, who needs a few hundred pages of finely honed prose when the Israelis have come to this conclusion on their own. But it quickly became clear within a month of October 7th that no, nothing fundamentally changed. The Israelis are making the same old mistakes. And so really all I did was update it and note, for example, that what had seemed like a remote possibility, that is to say, the ending of Hamas rule in Gaza, now was an immediate possibility. So something, tenses changed and emphases changed. But after that first month of confusion, I realized nothing basic needs to change. And yeah, they still do read my book, sad to say.
All right. Well, want to recommend to all of our viewers to pick up a copy of Israel Victory. And thank you, Daniel Pipes, for joining us on the FDD Morning Brief today.
My pleasure.
Okay, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. 6 of my colleagues released a new FDD monograph about the information war that is being waged against Americans by China, Russia, and Iran. It's edited by FDD's Brad Bowman, the superstar director of our Center on Military and Political Power. The report is called Cognitive Combat, and it sounds the alarm for the millions of Americans who continue to get played by our adversaries in this space. The report proposes steps that can help the U.S. better defend itself in the information domain. What I like about this report, it calls on Washington to finally take the info warfare fight directly to the enemy. FDD China programs Nate Pekarsik and Emily de la Bruyere published a new FDD memo on light detection and ranging, or LiDAR technology. It's a crucial component of China's broader Internet of Everything strategy. My colleagues argue that the U.S., its allies, and the private sector must respond to this risk with both defensive and offensive measures. And for those who enjoyed my interview on this program with Australian-British scholar Kylie Moore-Gilbert, you'll recall that she was held for more than 2 years in Iranian prisons. I encourage you to check out a longer format interview she had with FDD's founder and president, Cliff May, and Behnam Ben Taleblu. That one can be found on FDD's Foreign Policy podcast. It's fascinating to hear Kylie's full story, not to mention her thoughts on hostage diplomacy. Okay, that's it for today. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, and please support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another riveting episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.